two speakers. Good evening and welcome to SCI-Arc. I'm Ming Feng, the Graduate Program Director. And I'm here to introduce our visiting lecturer this evening, Mark Johnson. A few weeks ago, Pete Walker came to SCI-Arc to present his interest in landscape as extension of architectural form, using a hybrid of architectural discipline and conceptual art strategies. Tonight, we continue our conversation on landscape architecture and its impact on urban design with Mark Johnson. As founder of Civitas, a multifaceted studio in Denver, Colorado, urban designer and landscape architect Mark Johnson leads as a thinker, team leader, and consensus builder. The firm's designs range from landscape projects such as Museum Park in Miami, a new residential and waterfront park in Kansas City, to the rehabilitation of the Los Angeles River right here in our backyard. Now, before this evening, I have a chance to just talk with Mark for a brief 5 minutes, and he started giving me the list of all of the projects that he's currently been working on, and I will not do him justice with this introduction because I think Mark is designing the whole country at this point. He has like 5 projects in San Diego and 12 projects in St. Louis and another 6 projects or 3 projects in Miami, and it's just all over the place. And every major city in this country, Civitas has really have made a big impact with all of those multiple projects. Mark is also well known for developing strategies which blends economics, demographics, physical structures, and circulation, which he has employed for projects ranging in scale from a neighborhood vision of for Charlotte, North Carolina, to large urban redevelopment projects, such as a land use and redevelopment plan for Olmsted Design Balboa Park in San Diego, which is only one of the 5 large-scale projects that Mark is currently working on. In all this work, his approach is humanistic, inclusive, but intensely practical, with a central interest in engaging the man in the street, in appreciating the local culture, in creating vital, dynamic urban places, and affirming the culture of the city. Mark Johnson received his Bachelor of Landscape Architecture from Utah State University and his Master from Harvard Graduate School of Design. He is a Fellow of the American Society of Landscape Architects and a member of the Congress of New Urbanism and Urban Land Institute. I think we can all agree that these overarching ideas, which often create the context in which buildings are framed and by which the role to be played by architecture is often defined, deserve our interest and appreciation. Please welcome Mark Johnson.
Good evening. Can you hear me okay? And hello to any friends I have in the audience that I haven't been able to say hello to yet. It was a very nice introduction. It's fascinating to me and wonderful that SCI-Arc is welcoming landscape architects to the school to talk, and especially great that you had my really dear friend Pete Walker here a couple weeks ago, because one thing that you will see is that my approach to landscape architecture and Pete's, while if we spoke together privately, they're the same, you're going to see some wild differences. Ming mentioned the humanistic idea of my approach to the work, and that is very powerful influence. I'm interested in the land and how people interact with the land. These are the people of that land. These are Mongolians, where I visited recently. People take things from the land and they make things with it. And together the land and the people become one through a culture over time. People seek to express themselves And when things become too expressive, sadly, people seek to repress themselves. The operation of land, people, and culture spread over time is powerful, and as a species, we seek to develop knowledge and to nourish our spirits. Now, we all tend to think of ourselves as an individual, but in fact, we are one of many, many, many. And around the world, as you read history, you find that it's symbol, sign, and language that binds together to create a civitas. And I'm not talking about my firm, I'm talking about the concept of settlement, culture, and civility. They always ask, what's the name of your lecture? So I gave it a name, Rebuilding Civitas, the Regeneration of Place and Urban Design. We are all about regeneration. As I like to say, we're not suburbitas. We exist in a theory of practice. We have studied ourselves intensely for years. The firm is now 25 years old. We're only about 30 people, and I think you're going to find it's kind of astonishing what 30 people can accomplish when they're focused, motivated, and when someone like me is supported by the staff that we have of intense ambition and talent. We think about the knowledge mix in the firm, and I'm just putting this here to point out that we emphasize ideas and skills. We do not emphasize expertise. Expertise is something that we borrow, that we rent. We find experts. We live in the world of ideas. Our self-identity, and we think of ourselves against other design firms. Most design firms are client-dependent. Some are client-directed. We have chosen to try to become an independent agent to drive our own future, to be creative leaders and thought leaders in the world. If you look at a spectrum ranging on the right from the theory to the left to production, if your mission is to design really cool things, you probably have what we call a design-driven practice. Our mission, however, is to guide the decisions that give impact to improving the health, quality of life, and sustainability of cities. So we are a strategic practice driven by ideas. One of the things that came to me many years ago, I was the chairman of the editorial board of Landscape Architecture magazine for many years. And I was always frustrated that landscape architects were somehow not engaging the world at a sufficient scale. And I started to realize it's because of this. In any urban situation, someone defines needs, they then claim that they are facts, they get pushed through this filter of law, politics, and economics, and then someone says, aha, we need a designer. The conditions for design are already framed. We've chosen to try to change that paradigm, to focus on establishing the facts and using design synthesis to put law, politics, economics in a box, because we believe that design drives change. Now, if you're going to take that approach, you have to live within a political context. And politics are something I spend way too much of my time participating on. There are many different constituents in a political arena. Certainly not going to describe them. But every major project has at least these constituent components, competing for attention, competing to win. And they exist out of a culture. The cultures of every city are different. LA is tremendously different than San Diego. San Diego is tremendously different than Memphis. Memphis and Miami might as well be on other planets. But along with culture, there's something I like to call myth. Every city has its myths. Myth is the way that a culture tries to test a person's allegiance and compliance with culture by putting out veiled propositions, which I call myth or sometimes lore, to see if people will sort of drink the Kool-Aid and participate. The combination of myth and culture creates a very, very challenging situation to achieve very large work. And these green lines indicate a complete crossover that you have between the array of constituents in this milieu of myth and culture within which decisions are made. So we have an operational approach to this, which is first to identify what is the myth. You know, in San Diego, for example, people like to call it America's cheapest city. That doesn't mean it's inexpensive. It means that they're too cheap to spend money on civic improvements, and they believe it. It's not true, but they believe it. We focus hard on confirming what the underlying values of a culture are so that we can attach to them. Then we try to create a new lexicon, to rename the issues at hand, to rename the opportunities so that the baggage that goes with the myth can't be attached to the new project. Then we establish principles, and once we've done that, we can start to define a common problem and set a common vision. We operate under a manifesto. Regenerate nature. We're landscape architects. Nature is important to us. Stimulate human nature. I'm intensely interested in the engagement of people with place. Celebrate culture and build for time. If there is something like 4,000 to 5,000 years of recorded human history, at best, if we hope, we're in the middle. As a landscape architect, you can only start things, you can never finish anything. Time always wears down on you. Nature is nothing more than a combination of geology, climate, time, and life. And if you only have geology, climate, and time, you get this. If you add life, you get this. The diversity expands exponentially. And by the way, the thing on the right is a place that I designed and built, a campground in the North Cascades. It's a place that's made with intent. Stimulate human nature. This little girl had this spoon in this decomposed granite next to the Villa Borghese in Rome. And she was there for a half hour, just kind of blah, 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 blah. And it really captured for me this intense engagement and curiosity that humans have with their surroundings. That it doesn't take much to open the mind. So we engage in the landscape. And as we do, the landscape informs us and we inform it. It's very important to observe how people see and feel their world and how it affects them. One of the most powerful things of human nature is being alone. People go to public spaces to be in landscapes, to be alone, and to be alone together. Each of these people are here being alone, or perhaps with a friend, but they're there because they want to be alone in a place that's filled with others. Food is fundamental to human nature. Play. Many of these, by the way, are projects that we've designed. And these are all pictures that I've taken from all over the world and from our projects. I would rather than hire a professional photographer, I'd like to go out with a camera and see how people use our work. Curiosity, something we designed in Colorado. The idea of prospect, sitting on a high point and looking out over the landscape makes us feel safe, makes us calm. And then movement. Movement's a very interesting thing because movement changes our engagement with landscape and fulfills us in new ways. The way that we're interconnected in the world today is a very curious and obviously a powerful thing for all of us. And so I've been starting to study movement and watch how people behave as they move through landscapes. And if you notice, they become distracted by their sense of place. And then they reflect on themselves once again. This is just a ride on the San Diego trolley. I just did this for fun because I wanted to see how, in fact, people engage their sense of place in the world as they move. I believe we have something that's not just memory, but we also have visual memory. I also think we have serial memory. I think we remember these sequences and they inform us. Thinking. Now, we could stand here all night and nobody would guess what's happening in this picture. And that's because I happened to experience this myself. You'll notice that this is the Picasso in front of the Civic Center in Chicago. There are couples sitting here. A couple of them have lunches. The kids are sort of running around. And you can see that they're not really excited or happy. I'm sure it's very blurry. This is an ancient picture, 1973. The reason that I know it's happening is I took this picture before I sat there. You go inside this building and get your marriage license. And right before you walk in, you say, well, maybe we should just sit down and talk about this. The most intensely private thinking in a completely public environment. A truly wonderful kind of engagement. Culture. Culture is tremendously important, but it begins, in my mind, with family and friends, and the idea of encounter, the incidents which bring people together, in which they test their sense of belonging or challenge one another. The idea of performance, which does that in a more expanded way. See, for years, we've been trying to design these places so that these things would happen. We didn't plan this performance. It showed up because we made a place where the incidental crossing of paths in a place that was encoded with a certain meaning creates a situation where people show up and perform. Events, the idea of spectacle, the idea of ritual, and interestingly, to me, one of the highest ideals of landscape, the idea of veneration. This happens to be Commons Park in Denver. The park was only open 3 months when this picture was taken on 9/11/2001. 3 months after we built this park, someone came to this place and put flags on top of a hill because it had already become a place of veneration to them. It's a powerful endorsement of design. Then the idea of time. In that same park, this used to be warehouses. I'll show you a picture later. Here you can see it under construction. And then a little while later, it's complete. But then everything changes. Time happens. Look at the landscape. By the way, this landscape that you see in the foreground, which is native material, was planted from 100% from seeds that we personally collected from a donor site 30 miles downstream on the Platte River, so that we could have the specific ecotype of each species that would thrive in this place. But the buildings also grow with time. So we came up with this notion that what we're really all about is regeneration, and we have some principles for that. And what I'm trying to do here, obviously, is mix who we are and what we think with historical examples, with some theory, with some proposition, with the work that we do. I believe that cities, if cities are going to be sustained, the cities that last are built firmly on an ecological structure of their place. And I'll give you an example. To me, it's pretty powerful. Boston, obviously. A little story about Boston. Boston sits on the Shawmut Peninsula on this neck, with a deep harbor with Long Wharf, where you could bring goods from the old world to the new, and the top of a hill, Beacon Hill, on a very defensible site. And the stippled areas, of course, are the marshy areas. So a deep harbor with a defensible hill, simple. Long Wharf gets built out into the bay. The State House gets put on the top of the hill because we're humans, we like to claim territory. State Street emerges. The Common is put on the sunny side of the slope. We don't put our cows on the north side of the slope. We go to the sunny side. And a financial district emerges between. It looked something like this in a period photograph. You can see Long Wharf on the top and the Common and Garden on the bottom. And they're still there. Long Wharf on the right, in the bay, State Street, and the old State House on top of the hill. But by design, we start to expand those patterns. We took the muddy river, that sort of wiggle on the upper left, and Olmsted took that and gave it shape and form and used it as a natural cleansing system, but also a place-making tool. The public garden and Commonwealth Avenue were added to connect. Charles River Basin was turned into a sort of tidal pool with formal edges and grand esplanade. These, of course, are not the schemes that were built, but it did get built in some fashion. Here's the Fenway and the garden and the Common. And look at how the cluster of the city has come to be formed around the combination of the ecological structure of place and the design form given by the landscape. You see Beacon Hill, the financial district, the shopping district, the red light district, Washington Street, Back Bay, all clustering around this combined act where the human organism has responded to the ecological place and developed something that resonates with human intent and natural system. The public realm is a landscape that connects. Powerful principle. Connections are tremendously important. So I'll take that same story and bring it to Denver. We sit here on the edge of the mountains. Very interesting slide. You see these little patches on the lower right, those are sand dunes. What's happening here is the glaciers scoured the Rockies and the rivers carried the sand down. The wind blows it away, and where Denver sits, the sand is about 300 feet deep. People and animals follow rivers, and trails meet and cross at a river. Here we're in Indian camp. The chief was a guy named Little Raven, and we recently named a street after him. He was an Arapaho, and he camped along this river at the confluence because he was taking advantage of the trade. He's a merchant. So here you have an 1880-something picture, and you see that confluence on the left. And if you can see that red circle, that's where the city began. That's our equivalent of Long Wharf. You see the State House on the hill in the circle. Just like everybody, we put our flag on the top of the hill. And a line emerged between the two that sets up the city. Later, Kessler came along and tied this city together with parks and parkways, taking raw land and making these urban connections, which exist and become the backbones of the premier neighborhoods today, and then took our little creek called Cherry Creek and formalized it into a great parkway here under construction. So here's Denver. Capitol is in red, the line leads to the river, and here's an aerial of the city about 15 years ago. Over those years, we have designed 5 parks on the river, many parks in downtown, including retrofits of some of these which are old parks like Civic Center, 9 different streets as green streets to make these connections, to start to give our core a sense of interconnection which is based on landscape, building upon the ecological structure of place, but formalizing and urbanizing it to a series of sectors. And there you see, on the left is the confluence, and here, if I can see it, I always get lost in my own town. The state, I guess I'm oblique enough, I can't quite see. The state capitol is right there. And there's that line. So that simple green line that I drew, look at how the city has clustered around the center of power, the origin of the city, and for what it's worth, my office is right there. And that's the new Libeskind building. I'm the only private property owner in the block. The Clifford Still building is being built right here, right now. We've worked on these connections for years, building trails. This is on top of a tunnel that we built. We've designed 34 light rail stations in the Denver system. We cross transit malls downtown. We love fun. There are speakers under this, and these people stopped because there were pigs making noises under the sidewalk. It's fun to engage people with fun. Life should be enjoyable. Larimer Square, probably the most iconic street in the city, something we designed in 1989. We have moved and closed many, many streets. I happen to be a car freak. I have cars and motorcycles. I love going fast. But as a designer, I try and get rid of cars and move them out of this space. And if you can see, the little church here is the same as here. In the Central Platte Valley, there's that confluence again, and you can see how it was taken over by trains and viaducts, and how this industrial area that was built upon the railroad that followed the river was the back door, the front door for goods and services, but from a community point of view, a back door. And it looked like this about 15 years ago. We did this plan, which is actually 5.5 by 13 feet. This is probably 1993. And the mayor took it and rolled it up, and he carried it to meeting after meeting. And pretty soon the mayor and I were going all over the city promoting the idea of a chain of parks along the river, reclaiming the train yards, bringing the urban grid out to this new front. It's the question of how do you take the back of the city and make it the front? And we did it. There you see 3 of the parks with many new buildings. We rebuilt 1.5 miles of the river. We built 7 bridges. This one, it's very wide. That's because the fire marshal required that we exit 33% of Mile High Stadium, the new Invesco field that we were part of, across this bridge. So it's 33 feet wide to handle 28,000 people in a 15-minute exiting period. Lots of bridges and trails, 2 miles of ecological reconstruction of the river itself. And then here's what it looked like. And here it is coming out of the ground, and you can see us expanding the roads, bringing them down to the new street. The curvy street is the one we called Little Raven. 3 new bridges. We were actually the client for the bridges. We designed the middle bridge, the little one with tusks. We were the mayor's representative and client for the other 2 bridges. Connections, connections, connections. And we engaged many, many school children in education activities. This used to be a warehouse, and here's a picture I took last week. We are using urban runoff from the Central Platte Valley to nourish this wetland where a warehouse used to be. And again, that's all from collected seed. Tremendously successful from a habitat point of view, right in the heart of the city. The public realm also builds value for the long haul. We got interested in the green roof movement like so many, but in Denver we only have about 11 or 12 inches of rain per year, and so it's kind of questionable. How are you going to make that happen? We could put grass on top, but we'd have to put sprinklers on top. And somehow it seems the law to spray water on a roof when the roof's supposed to keep the water out. So we joint ventured with the Denver Botanic Garden with the question of, is it possible to build a green roof in Denver that's not irrigated? And I know you can't really read this, but the important piece is right here. Planting media, scoria, turf face, expanded shale, and compost. A very, very inorganic mix of rock. That's because the botanists have theorized that there are about 100 species of alpine plants which grow in rock that will probably thrive in the rapid climate change that takes place on a roof. So obviously it's not going to look like that. I have all these kids that love to do funny little things like this. But it's all actually gridded out in test plots with roughly 100 species so we can see what's going to survive. And we just actually had the dedication of this about 6 weeks ago. With Moshe Safdie, a dear friend in Salt Lake, we worked on this library. This is an 8-acre park on top of a park. Wherever it's green is on top of structure here. So there's a roof garden on the 6th floor, cars underneath, etc. The idea of how can we 3-dimensionally engage people in a landscape in a city. So from the lower right in the tactile to being on top of the building and getting this sense of direct connection back to the Wasatch Front, the Salt Lake Basin. And how can we create this kind of feeling, this feeling of remoteness, the sense of nature, 6 stories up. Then getting a little bigger in scale. When I first came to Memphis, the mayor asked me how I was going to bring the river to the city. And this is the Mississippi, by the way. I said, well, Mr. Mayor, I think the Mississippi is as the Mississippi does. We're going to have to bring the city to the river. I don't think we're going to tell the Mississippi what to do. So in a very long 2-year plan, we will locate, this has been completely approved now, and parts of it are under construction actually. We're relocating 4 industries which are up the harbor. And a fun fact here is that this is the only cobblestone landing left on the Mississippi. This is the Wolf River Harbor, Mud Island Museum. The Memphis Belle lives there if you're into airplanes. And this river can fluctuate vertically 59 feet in a single year. Think about that. So you have this cobblestone landing. The idea is to bring the city to the river. We got the Corps of Engineers to approve the removal of the 4 industries to President's Island and an 80-acre fill to connect the city to Mud Island, a restoration of the cobblestones, which is actually underway at this time, a new landing for the Mississippi Queen, which is under construction at this time. By removing the industries, we can build a pedestrian bridge to connect Union Street, which is Main Street, Memphis, right out to the river, and get about $800 million worth of new development. In Kansas City, we're working with Herbert Dreiseidel, a dear friend from Oberlingen, Germany, and probably the world leader on the reuse of urban water, on this 120-acre brownfield site, the only place where people of Kansas City can, on public property, touch the water. We're developing a complete recapture system to take all of our urban water, store it, cleanse it biologically, use it in features, run it through a park, and release it back into the Missouri, in a system that is a network of runnels and cleaning facilities within the urban neighborhood. So we will have open channels as part of the streetscape, a neighborhood which is embracing a new park, which takes the water into a series of water features into a constructed wetland here, before we release the water back into the river. We do a lot of, well, we're really proud of this. You've ever seen so many cars? That's got to be the late 50s sometime, an old shopping mall. Well, we have, with a very, very progressive and risk-friendly developer, we have rebuilt the entire thing, 100 acres, with a new center for this suburb that had no heart whatsoever. A beautiful new plaza with a skating rink and rink with cafes and beautiful fountains, and it's been hugely successful. In Miami, this idea of adding value, how can you add value to a city? This is the government cut cruise ship terminal, downtown Miami, the American Airlines Arena, the new Pele Performing Arts Center is right here, that's the beach. Our site is 36 acres of derelict land that was a park that had a murder in it 3 weeks after the park opened during the bicentennial. And the community got together and decided to move the Museum of Art, which is being designed now by Herzog de Meuron, and the Museum of Science, being designed by Grimshaw, into the park. And we've been working on this 4 years. That's the Art Museum, the Science Museum, and these are just rough block models that we made before the 2 architects were actually selected. But the idea is to make a public park which takes advantage of the water where people can access the water, which protects the manatee in the turning basin of the Biscayne Bay Aquatic Preserve here, which provides a series of shady rooms and activities to bring people down to the edge, and sets up a great site for the museums. So here's the plan. And I just had a public meeting there and got this approved about 3 weeks ago now. So these are fresh drawings. The idea is to take the royal palms, which are a swamp tree, and bring them out of water itself with elaborate gardens, a beautiful palm garden at night, and to use the slip for tall ships, which is what it was built for in the first place. We are now just beginning construction documents on this and have an additional, this is called the Bay Walk, and we have a mile of this that we're working on. And then even bigger concepts of regeneration, socioeconomic health, environmental health, equity and justice. 2 projects here that are important. I have been responsible for the redevelopment of Stapleton Airport, one of 3 people, since 1988. Imagine, 1 project for 20 years. But it's big. It's the biggest redevelopment brownfield in the country. I have been everywhere in this. I led the selection committee that selected the developer and the negotiating team. My firm wrote all of the zoning ordinances and the development agreement. It goes on and on and on. A very challenging project. It's based in water. Turns out, these drawings are from the late 80s, and so all I had were these crummy slides of them. But this is called Sand Creek. This is Westerly Creek, which was in a pipe. There's the terminal for the airport. And the basic idea, after about 150 public meetings, was simply to grow the city back onto the site, to open up and connect the creek, to store our storm water here. We're not allowed to release this water into this creek because this water is supposed to go into the Platte River 4 miles away. So we have to hold it for days before we can release it. That formed the backbone for an open space system, 1,645 acres of open space to be exact, so that we can take the airport and make the figure the landscape. The city is the ground, the landscape is the figure, creating all of this new frontage, as I've said before, to take something which was the industrial back of the city and turn it into the front. It's been tremendously successful. We actually won the 2000 Stockholm Partnership World Award for Sustainability for this project. It turned out you're looking at a 3/8 of a mile run here, which only had 0.4% of fall. And so we came up with the idea of a diagonal surface drainage so that we would put our drainage into a natural means instead of a pipe. This is the former alignment of runway 8 right. And what you're looking at here is very complex. There's that diagonal that I spoke of. Right now we have about 6,000 residents and about 2 million square feet of office and commercial space built. A few things that make this specifically interesting from a sustainability point of view. I wrote into the rules, number 1, no developer, no builder can own more than 12 contiguous lots. That's because we studied 16 Denver neighborhoods and found that the subdivisions were always tiny. So we forced them to do, that's a different builder than this is. That's a different builder than this is. That's a different builder than this is. So it's a hodgepodge of different product types and different houses. The second thing that I required was no building would be built at Stapleton that was ever built anywhere else. So every single building was purpose-built and designed for this site. Third, I didn't mention, I'm in charge of, not only we wrote all the design rules, I'm in charge of all the design review, and I hate design review. Believe me, I hate design review. It's a necessary sort of evil. As I like to say, design review can only stop the truly horrible. It can't really make anything good happen. Another thing that we did was made it impossible to put more than 75 multifamily units in one cluster. And we did that very strategically so that we would never have a gated community, that we would never have a, what I like to call a REIT-funded, pension-funded apartment complex. And we had to have a real city here. We have 4 schools that were built. And so you see a very complex plan that has been phenomenally successful. And there is the drainage way again. Part of this is a 6-unit building, and that's a $1 million house. That's a $280,000 house. Trying to build socioeconomic diversity was a primary objective. Then with several people here from LA, and I see Michael in the front row. Hi, Michael. With Meal Air, Wank Associates, ourselves, Tetra Tech, Chris Robert, and Adon Ortega, we worked for about 2 years on the LA River. LA is an interesting place. It used to look like this, and then we made it look like that. That's the valley. And then we made it look like this, and then we filled it with people like this. Very fascinating city. The project is 32 miles long from Canoga Park all the way down to Washington Bridge right here. So right now we're sitting in SCI-Arc, we're sitting about right here. I think that's probably the building. Dodger Stadium, downtown. One of the things that's interesting about the LA River is this is the basin, okay? Most people tend to think, this is one of those myths I talk about, they tend to think that the real problem, quote unquote, of the LA River is the urbanization. Well, certainly urbanization increases the concentration of water, the rate at which water comes to the river. But the real flooding issues with the river have to do with the mountain basin. Because if you think about it, I'm sure you've seen these maps where they take Colorado and stretch it out and it's as big as the whole United States once you flatten it. If you were to flatten all these mountains, you have a huge surface area that's much bigger than the valley. It's the water falling in the mountain basin that's causing the most severe flooding issues. This river was controlled and channeled very, very early. The railroads first built levees which were originally made of wood. You can see them here. They didn't last very long. This is what it looked like. But it was a very dangerous river. This river, you can see how, look at how fragmented the urban pattern is. You can see the city was sort of afraid to touch the river because it was dangerous. And so the Corps of Engineers was called in after a huge flood in the 30s, and here you see the concreting of the LA River. And it looks like this. And it's one very fascinating piece of design and a very elegant piece of design for its simplicity because it's only designed to one variable. It's sort of easy to do something elegant and simple when you only have to solve one problem, right? This river is 39 feet deep here at 6th Street, 450 feet wide at the top, and when it's in full flood, it carries 160,000 cubic feet per second of water going 30 feet per second of velocity. That's about 23 miles an hour, 39 feet deep. So it's tremendously efficient. When this river turns, it actually super elevates, so the water doesn't slosh out. But it's not an asset. It's been taken out of its context. There's a lot of analysis, and this is an interesting fact. Here you see the basin. Here's the right-of-way for the river. You can see there's unused space right here. So early ideas, well, could we put water down here? Could we do water quality? Could we have underground conduits? What could we do? Of course, many people wanted to get rid of the concrete. But depending on where you are, you have anywhere from 4 to 6 times the amount of land that you would need to widen the river out if you really just restore its natural function with a soft bottom. And this would be thousands and thousands and thousands of private property that would have to be acquired to do this. And another fallacy in that is, you think about it, this is an entirely managed system. This is not a natural river. This is a river that's somehow trying to handle the mountain runoff, plus the urban runoff, plus all the control systems, plus the effluent runoff that we put into it, about 35 million gallons a day, some days as high as 50 million gallons. This is the drawing that really shows you the problem of the mountain basin. These are the major tributaries to the river, like Tongawa, or Sepulveda here, Tahunga Wash here. And where these tributaries come in, if you wanted to slow the river down, you'd have to store this much water at each one of those places. One of the foundation problems of the river is that it's fragmented. Like so many things in LA, fragmentation is kind of everywhere. The concrete is owned by LA County. The water is owned by the city of LA. And the Corps of Engineers sets the rules. So you tell me, who's in charge? Nobody really knows. So one of the things that we, Civitas, did was write a new governance structure for the river, which is being actively pursued now, to bring the management of the river together. The reason that it's so blank is that the county owns the concrete, and the county flood control is not in the business of managing recreation. They're not in the business of allowing people in here when they might fall in and die. So they fenced it off to the extent they can and basically paved it, so it's simple. But if you could change the management paradigm, if you could make a decision that every 50 years it's okay for this river to flood and for vegetation and trails to be flooded, you could do this. Now, by the way, I see Mia just walked in. Each of these drawings, there's really 3 design firms that all collaborated together, playing different roles. Most of these drawings were touched by all 3 firms electronically going around. It's quite an interesting process. But you could actually have this on the river just with a management change. If you had the capital to do these improvements, there's no regulation and no hydraulic reason why you can't have that. If you could do the attenuation and store the mountain water, then you could make the bottom of the river soft again. Same thing in Studio City. I'll do this quickly. And then downtown, the same thing. If you could change the management paradigm, look at how much land is available to you on both sides of the river. Or he'll show you one thing, and then I'm done. This is just another interpretation of the Civitas Manifesto. That's a pretty powerful statement. Thank you very much. I don't know if you'd like me to take any questions if anyone has any. I guarantee I can't see you because all I see is the sun.